On today's Monday Night Travel, Scotland guide James Macletchie takes us island hopping across Scotland's remote and historic archipelagos. We begin with some gems of the Outer Hebrides, scenic Mull, monastic Iona, and the bird paradise of Scapa. Next, we venture further from shore to explore James's native Outer Hebrides. We finish in the Orkney Islands, where we tour a prehistoric village and glimpse remnants from the wars of the 20th century. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. My name is Gabe Gunning, and I have the privilege of serving as your host this evening as we hop across Scottish islands with a very special guest. Well, I am extremely excited tonight. I was just saying to Ben that I love doing Monday Night Travel shows on places that I've been before, but it's a special thrill to get to do them on places I haven't been before, because I'll be taking notes along with the rest of you. And tonight I will certainly be busting out my pen and paper as we learn about the Scottish Islands. And I would love to introduce our guest for this evening, a native of the Scottish Islands and a great Rick Steves Europe guide. Please give a warm Monday Night Travel welcome to James Macletchie. James, welcome.
Hi there, good evening.
So James, as we will see tonight, there are many Scottish islands. Which one are you joining us from tonight?
So I'm in North Uist in the Outer Hebrides, middle of the Atlantic Ocean, about 30 miles from the mainland of Scotland, and totally isolated out here at the moment. Everybody else is asleep and here I am awake.
Well, you're not totally isolated because you have over 2,000 of us here with you tonight.
Oh, fantastic.
And Excellent. We're so glad for you taking some time out of your evening. And before we get started, I'm always curious, especially for somebody who is, as you say, secluded out in the Northern Islands of Scotland. How did you learn about Rick Steves Europe, get connected with the company, and which tours do you lead for us?
I was very fortunate. I met a lovely guide, Anne Doig, who's one of the longest serving Rick Steves guides, and she introduced me to Rick Steves and an amazing company, and I did some interviews, and happily I was accepted, and then got given Scottish tours, and I do the 13-day Scottish tour, round from Glasgow right the way through the islands and back down through the Highlands. And to me, it's a fabulous tour because it takes me out onto the west coast and close to where I am at home. So it's a fantastic, fantastic place.
Excellent. Well, I've always said, and I'm not just saying I've always said that 13-day Scotland tour is at the top of my list of tours that I would like to take. And I'm sure that we have some people tuning in tonight that have been on that tour, and I'm sure some of them have been with you and are excited to see you. We have a lot of islands to get to tonight, so I want to get going. But one thing that we like to do is we know that there are a lot of common questions that a lot of travelers have. And so we want to answer some of those travel nuts and bolts right at the top of the show with a little at a glance of the Scottish Islands. So James, you told me earlier that for most travelers, you recommend going to the Scottish Islands May through mid-August. Why is that?
That's a really good time of year to go because of the weather and the longer days. So it gives you much more opportunity. There's more things going on. There's more ferries. So you've got a greater chance to move on the island hop, as we call it, back and forth across the islands. And the ferries run up to about 8, 9 o'clock at night. So it gives you a real opportunity. But the light at that time of year is very, very beautiful. And people find it quite strange at that time because there's so many of them say they can't sleep, so we just say go out and enjoy it.
And speaking of the ferries, I'm curious, in a lot of times in more rural areas it's helpful to have a car. Do you recommend that people rent a car, and if so, do people get that car on the mainland and drive on to the ferry, or can they get the cars once they're on the islands?
Well, you can do a combination. What we find is that quite a lot of people are booking cars on the mainland and then driving up through the Highlands of Scotland and then coming out to the islands. They're going on the ferries. Other people will come in on the ferries or on the aeroplanes, and they'll hire the cars from the airport. They'll pick them up and then they'll drop them off at the airport on the way back. So it's fairly easy. And we've got a very good system now in the islands, so they're very good cars as well. So far better than it was in the 1970s. So it's really easy for people to rent the cars and at a fairly decent price as well.
And you said that really ferries is, aside from the obvious things like hotels and flights, you said that ferries is really the only thing that people should be thinking about reserving in advance when they come to this part of Scotland. How far in advance do you typically recommend that people make ferry reservations?
About 4 to 5 months in advance, because it is really, really busy. So what happens with the ferries is they release certain blocks of time. So you've got to get in there. We've had a huge influx of camper vans and things over the last number of years. So it's really important, if you want to come there, book your ferry, book your flights and your hotels. Everything else will take care of itself once you're there. But getting there is the most important part for your journey.
And you must have kind of a special, they must have a special permit or something for residents like you that you can kind of skip the line and get on the ferry first.
We'd like to believe that.
Okay, I was going to say.
It doesn't quite work like that. Many of the time I can't get off the island as well. But we do have a discount card. But the great thing for passengers who want to travel out to the Hebrides or these islands is we have what's known as road equivalent tariff. So it gives you a much cheaper fare across the water. So it's actually very affordable to go out to visit these islands.
Okay. And speaking of how to afford and pay for things, I know one question that a lot of travelers have these days is you have some parts of Europe that are going cashless, some parts that are still very cash intensive. What's your recommendation for what to do with money when you're on the Scottish Islands?
We're a combination, really. Most of us now we accept credit cards and everything. Cash is always still king in some of the smaller communities. It's always good to have maybe 20 or 30 pounds with you. Loose change as well, because, you might want to just get a cup of coffee and sometimes you have to have a minimum charge on a card. So you just use the card, but everywhere accepts credit cards. The only one that's sometimes slightly difficult is American Express. There's slightly different charges on that, but they do accept them. But every other card is acceptable. We also have 1 or 2 auto tellers around if people needed to get cash there.
And then lastly, talking about staying connected when we're traveling, you said that travelers should expect a few places where maybe they don't get signal if they're going into the remote Scottish Islands, which I'm sure for some people is a highlight and for others a stressor.
Yeah, it's really interesting because people want to have Wi-Fi where they travel. We don't necessarily want to have Wi-Fi when we travel. So the problem we have with the islands is our connections can be quite varied. So it can be quite difficult. Most of the hotels will have connections and Wi-Fi, but honestly, going around the islands, you don't really start to look at your phone unless you're taking photographs. There's just so much to see in all the islands. So once you get to the hotel at night, check your emails, load up, chat to friends.
All right, well, thank you for some of those quick nuts and bolts. I know those are questions that our travelers often have, but now we have a lot of islands to see and not a lot of time. So we're going to get started. We'll go first to the Inner Hebrides, then out to where you are in the Outer Hebrides, and then to the Orkney Islands. We're going to be using some of the footage from Rick's Scottish Islands TV show, which is a reminder, if you want to watch it without commentary and interruptions, you can do so at ricksteves.com. But also, James is a very accomplished photographer and also has some new photos and videos that will be a treat for all of you who are already very familiar with Rick's content. So we are going to get started and embark first to the Inner Hebrides.
Oban's been the unofficial capital of Scotland's west coast ever since the train arrived back in 1880. The hub of the local ferry system, this low-key resort is nicknamed the Gateway to the Isles.
Oban's harbourfront is lined with Victorian facades, recalling the early arrival of tourists just over a century ago. Before then, its economy was dominated by fishing. Even today, a tiny fleet stays busy. When the rain clears, sun-starved Scots enjoy their esplanade and the beach.
James, I know that you had just said that for most travelers, May through August is the best time. I'm curious with some of these small beach towns, if travelers do want to try going more in shoulder season, should they expect a lot of seasonal business closures?
Depending where you are, Oban is fairly okay, but what you notice is that from Easter time right the way through to September, things are beginning to open up. They're fresh, everything's opening up. Early season before April, things are just slowly coming to it, so you might find a few things closed. Same with some of the restaurants and cafes and some of the activities, they don't really start. Shoulder period, things tend to wind down around about September time. But one thing I always say, that if you want to come at that early time of year and you get good weather, you will be there without crowds. You'll have the islands more or less to yourself. So it's a lovely experience to come and do that as well. It also gives you the islands in a different mode as well, because in the summertime we're very busy, but this time of year people are a little bit more laid back, just gearing up for the summer ahead.
Looks lovely.
The townscape is dominated by its busy ferry port. The port has long been a lifeline to the Hebrides Islands. Today, it's a popular springboard for island adventures. The best day out from Oban is the 3-island tour, and we've caught the early ferry on our way to Mull, Iona, and Scapa. Right away, we're immersed in grand island views. Be on deck to make the most of the experience. After an hour, you approach the Isle of Mull. Everything is coordinated, and a bus is standing by, ready to take us across the island. Enjoying the drive, you're struck by the pristine scenery, the sparse population, and how Mull feels hardly touched by civilization. On the far west of Mull, another ferry makes the short crossing to the Isle of Iona. Iona is tiny, but with a big history. It's just one village, 3 miles long, 150 people, almost no cars. It's famous as the birthplace of Christianity in Scotland.
The year was 563. A nobleman who became Saint Columba fought a battle over in Ireland. He won, but was so sickened by the bloodshed that he left his homeland, vowing never to return. According to legend, this was the first piece of land he came to out of sight from Ireland. He stopped here and built a church, which eventually became this abbey.
Iona became a center of Celtic Christianity. From here, St. Columba's monks spread the gospel throughout Scotland. This remote little island was a center of art and learning back when most of Europe was almost illiterate, mired in relative darkness. The exquisitely illustrated Book of Kells, this is a copy on display in Dublin, is perhaps the finest piece of art from Europe's early Middle Ages. Monks wrote it here on Iona in the 8th century.
James, I'm always fascinated with what type of people became monks and chose this secluded lifestyle, and why did they want to be in these remote, rugged, secluded places? Can you shed any light on that?
It's really interesting as you look at the spread of Christianity across Europe. It then came into Ireland around about the 5th and 6th century. And you started to see people going into monastic settlements. They'd learn about farming, they'd learn about way of life. So many of them would become devoted to God. And one of the things that they wanted to do was to go out and preach the gospel while others would go and do other things. But one of the things that they would do would be to go to remote islands, for example, and set up a hermitage there and go to the highest point and sit and commune with God in the most holy way. And that really was the ancient Celtic church. It really was to encompass the air, the sea, and the land all together. So this real feeling of continuity with God and communing with him. Anybody could actually become a monk as long as you followed certain practices. You came to these areas, you learned all about the religion. You then went and practiced, and when you hear about St. Columba himself, many preachers left from there and went right across Scotland, converting pagans and all of those people. Fascinating people, and as you go around Scottish Islands, you find on some of the remoter areas these small hermitages, and you wonder how on earth those people lived there around about in the 6th century. You thought, my goodness me, they had nothing. But the one thing they had was they always believed that God removed the people to allow them to commune with him. That was the most important thing.
It's amazing I can't fathom living in some of these secluded places today, much less, as you said, centuries ago. And I think you had said before that for some of the monks, Iona even became too bustling at one point, and some of them had to find even more secluded places.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at the development of Iona itself. It suddenly became so well known that everybody wanted to come there. Even kings wanted to come there and be buried. You had great scholars coming to the island, and suddenly those monks who had learned the ancient traditional way of the Celtic Church and communed with God in silence, they left the island because it no longer was this place that they had created in the first place. So they went to find solace somewhere else. And we've seen them come all the way up to the Hebrides. There's an island off my coastline, 8 miles off the coast, and there's a small hut there where some monk went for about 20 years. And you think, my goodness me, how did he survive?
Well, it is certainly fascinating. And I guess at least they had very nice views.
Yeah, indeed.
Over the next centuries, Columba's monastic community grew in religious importance. The abbey became the burial place for chiefs and kings. According to legend, dozens of ancient kings, Scottish, Irish, and even Scandinavian, rest here.
After many generations, in about the year 800, Viking raiders were terrorizing coastal communities all across Western Europe, including Iona. After one terrible massacre, 68 monks were killed right here on this beach. The survivors packed up their treasures, including the precious Book of Kells, and returned to Ireland.
Today, a thoughtful calm pervades Scotland's holiest of islands. After centuries of pillaging, little remains of the original abbey. But if you're interested in tranquility and a bit of meditative peace, Iona is a fine place for a break from your busy itinerary.
James, Rick had said earlier that getting out to Iona, the buses and the ferries were kind of coordinated. For most people, does that mean that there's kind of a set time that you arrive and leave Iona? Is there just kind of like one ferry in and one ferry out for the day and a set amount of time that you'd be on the island?
Yeah, so on the 3 island tour that Rick's talking about, you leave Oban early morning, around about 7 o'clock. You then get to Mull on the ferry. There's a bus waiting there to take you down all the way down to Fiumport. And there you board a small boat that'll take you then out towards Staffa. They'll keep you out there for a couple of hours and then bring you back onto Iona for about an hour and a half. And then you'll get the ferry back in the afternoon, and a bus will pick you up and take you back down to pick up the Mull Oban ferry. So the timings are all set up for you during the day. It's a fantastic service. And it's a real experience for visitors. And I know Rick thoroughly enjoyed his time there. But we see a lot of travelers going on that. And it's a wonderful day out for people.
Well, it sounds like a full day, but it sounds like it is worth it. And we will finish our 3-island tour of the Inner Hebrides for this evening by going on to the 3rd island of Staffa now.
Next, a fast boat takes us to our 3rd island of the day, Staffa, famous for its bird life and striking volcanic rock formations. Our captain gives us a dramatic sneak preview of the fabled Fingal's Cave. He then drops us off for time to explore. Walking across the uninhabited island, we head for the hidden nests of a colony of Atlantic puffins. We wait patiently and quietly, observing hard-working adults bringing home a fishy breakfast for their chicks. Hiking along the base of the cliffs, using Staffa's distinctive 6-sided basalt columns as stepping stones, we reach Fingal's Cave. Peering into the geological darkness, so surrounded by nature, I savor the moment. Enjoying the interplay of the sea and the rocks, I think of the generations of romantics who've stood right here and been inspired.
James, what is when Rick says the generation of romantics, is he referring to were there specific like artists that would come out here to Staffa to be inspired?
Yeah, it's a really interesting period in Scotland. Scotland started to change its own identity following the poems of Ossian by James Macpherson and the great Finn MacCool. And from that period, great writers used to come out here. It was a period of romance. It was a period of connecting back into the 18th, 19th century, connecting back to the land. You had Sir Walter Scott, Robbie Burns, Queen Victoria even made her way out towards here. Turner, Mendelssohn coming out here, writing an overture there. But what was really interesting about Queen Victoria when she came here as well, because she came here and suddenly saw that Scotland was this incredible, she believed it was actually a magical kingdom when she came here to Fingal's Cave. And as a result of that, people started to follow where the royalty had come. You had Dorothy Wordsworth, William Wordsworth. And when you actually look at some of the books they had incredible sketches of these islands. But of course, Sir Walter Scott, many people had read, Victoria had read his novels, encouraged by Albert, and they were the people who really brought this romantic movement back to the land and to the people as well. And it's an incredible period in Scotland, and it's the most important period in Scotland because it's what you have as an image of Scotland today. It actually stems from this period of the Romanticism and the Romantic period. But Turner and all those people came all the way out here, and the great poets as well. So it was a time of writing poetry and expression and connection to land.
Well, I can certainly see why Queen Victoria would think that it was a magical realm. I mean, with this view, it certainly seems that way. And does Staffa have a resident population? Are there any islands that are just kind of reserved for nature and wildlife, or are they all inhabited?
There's quite a lot. Most of the islands are uninhabited, like this island here. The main residents in the summer are the wildlife, the puffins. We have lots of what's known as national nature reserves, which are on many of the islands off our coastline. Some of them have people on them, others don't. But many of the inhabited islands, like of the Inner Hebrides, you'll hear the populations, and then you'll come to these remoter islands where you just go ashore for a day on a day trip and experience the wildlife. They're really left wild in the way they are, but at one time they would have been occupied, many of them, but through the Highland clearances and all that, people actually left, so they became uninhabited.
Well, James, that wraps up our first archipelago for the evening with the Inner Hebrides. And we now have a treat because we are going to go out to your native Outer Hebrides.
Yeah, thanks.
And, I would love for you to kind of introduce the next clip that we're going to see.
So this really is to give you an overview of what I see every day in my life. I love to go out and experience the island. One of the greatest things about being here is we've got big skies, beautiful seas, shell sand beaches, and it's just an incredible place to live on an island, to be a part of an island. You're always going out to look for something different. And the greatest thing that changes how an island is the light. And this is just an overview of the islands. It's short clips that I've taken with a drone and video, and I'll just show you the variety of landscape and things that we actually have here.
All right, well, this is a real treat. I'm going to sit back and enjoy, and James, you're going to give us some live voiceover for this one. So we will leave Staffa here and go to the Outer Hebrides.
So you're now looking at the landscape from the island of Barra. And this is one of the things about the Hebrides. You've got this beautiful color of sea, this azure color, this beautiful clarity of water. There's no pollution. And it's just one of the most incredible places to live. And everywhere you go, there are these incredible scenes and some of the most beautiful, stunning beaches you could ever see in the world. We've got some beaches here that are number 2 and 3 in the world. And as you can see, this is the height of summer. This is July. There's about 10 people on that beach. This is below my house. This is looking out onto the tidal pools, looking over towards the island of Harris. Again, not a person in sight. And then we have this treeless landscape of moorlands and lochs. And where I live is more lochs on the east coast and water. But we have lots of ancient archaeology as well. And that's one of the things you'll find on the islands, occupied for about 6,000 years. And you'll come across them. But of course, walking the beaches is great. You have the island to yourself at times. If we see two people on the beach, it's too crowded. You can come here and go fly fishing. You can go out and head out into the little boats. And we call this passing, sailing through clouds. The clouds come. And of course, we meet my friends. In the wintertime, I go onto the beaches, and these cows are on the beaches, the Highland cows. They're just beautiful. They even steal my sandwiches. In other islands, you've got Victorian lodges, and you look out over these incredible tidal flats, which fill with the Atlantic Ocean. Beautiful little villages where people live. But if you were out to the outdoors as well, you can come kayaking and go into this incredible clarity of water with such a variety of landscape to experience. And again, these are these shell sand beaches and this incredible habitat that you have here on the right-hand side. Maher, you can see some camper vans, but looking to the high hills of Harris. And of course, the inter-island ferries. This is a real experience, your chance to meet the locals, get on a ferry, hear the Gaelic language spoken, and sail in and out of the islands. And this is a little island called Eriskay, famous for the SS Politician and the sinking and loss of 200,000 bottles of whisky at one time. But look at this. This is what we classify as a horseshoe sand beach. This is one of our 2 nature reserves. Just stunning place. I'm down on these beaches. I've been on them since I was 6 years of age, and every day I go on them. And in the summertime, in spring, we start to plough the harvest. And I used to do this with my dad. And then at the end of the summer, we have millions and millions of flowers, 152 different species of wildflower growing here in the Machars. And there's one island you can come to, you can land on a beach. The only place in Europe you can land on a beach on a daily schedule. So that's just a little overview of my world, how I see it.
Well, it is an exceptionally beautiful world. I think I was especially taken aback just seeing it, that big horseshoe beach, and knowing that that's part of a nature preserve and not something that they've tried to turn into some big beach destination.
Yeah. No, we'll never have that.
I mean, you said that you went to that beach since you were 6 years old, and I'm so interested, James, how did it come to be that you and your family lived out in the Outer Hebrides?
Well, I was very fortunate. I was fostered here at the age of 6. So I was a child that came from nowhere and landed up on this incredible archipelago. My mum was a head teacher. My dad worked in a seaweed factory. We had sheep, chickens, cows, everything. And I was indoctrinated into this place. So you become a part of the island. It grows in you. You can never leave it. You always have this. There's a Gaelic word called cianalus, which means there's a drawing, the longing. You've always want to go home. You always have to get back to this place. And I've always maintained that I will try and keep the mind of a child by going on these beaches every day, just like I did when I was 6 years of age.
And so do you continue to live on the same island that you grew up on?
I live in the same village. I see the same people that I grew up with. It's almost tribal in a way. We all have our own villages. So I live in a very beautiful village called Solace. And we've got all the beautiful beaches, and we think we're special. But then the next village along thinks the same thing. But it's an incredible place to live.
I remember we had a show on Andalusia, and I remember our guest was from Sevilla, and I remember her saying, like, well, almost seeming surprised when Rick asked her if she would ever consider leaving. She was like, no, this is my place. These are my people. I'm rooted here. And I think that a lot of times Europeans, obviously not always, but I think many of them have that sense of rootedness in a way that maybe we don't to the same extent here in the US. Do you feel like a lot of the people on your island end up staying?
Yeah, a lot do. I mean, we do think of leaving. There are times we really think of leaving. But lockdown was a really big eye-opener for us. It gave us back our world. And everything else happened outside us for about 2 years. And it made us appreciate. And I spoke to somebody in my village who I hadn't spoken to for 10 years. And I saw him in lockdown walking down the beach. And he only lives a mile away from me. And it made us realize that the society has made us change a little bit, so we became more aware of each other again. So you got back that love for the place.
And yeah, I'm sure that the weather is not as beautiful every day as it was in your videos.
No, we have it's like the weather in Orkney. We have 2 seasons, 6 seasons of winter and 6 seasons of autumn and 2 days of summer. But you can come here and get weeks and weeks. When I was growing up as a child, we used to have 12 weeks of sunshine and warmth. We're not guaranteed that anymore. But if you get the beautiful days, there's nowhere more beautiful than a Scottish island.
I would love to continue exploring this a bit more because you've also shared some still photos with us in addition to those videos. So I would like to share some of those now and have you chat through them with us. Let me just bring those up. Here we go. So here we have a little map first.
Yeah, so it's just looking at, we were talking about on the right-hand side, we've got the Isle of Skye right the way down to the Inner Hebrides. And then we're right out on the left-hand side, as far west as you can go. From the very top of the map, just above Stornoway, right to the bottom is 130 miles with 13 occupied islands and over 100 deserted islands all around there. And when we go through to the next slide, you'll start to see that we're dictated to by the Atlantic Ocean. This is what creates our life cycle. We have the Gulf Stream off our coastline, keeps the water fairly warm at different times. This is in the winter. These are the 20-foot waves that we get. If we go on to the next slide, you'll start to see the area, the other side of life. This is where I live. This is my beach. This is what I see every day of my life, looking onto my little village where I grew up. We know everybody in there. And there's just something magical about coming from a place like this. Every time I look at it, I think, God, I cannot believe that I actually live there. And if we go through, we'll start to go through the slides. But one of the things we do have here, we've got a lot of archaeology, and we have some of the oldest standing stones anywhere in Britain here. And this is up at Callanish in the Isle of Lewis. And there's lots of Neolithic archaeology. We've got the early Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, Iron Age, right the way through. And the lovely thing about these things is we can go and touch them, we can hug them, you know, we can go and visit them whenever we want. And there's something special about them. We see faces in them and there's great stories associated with them. And again, these are the burial chambers. So they all seem to link into each other. So you can wander into the moors, come across this burial chamber, you'll go along, you'll come across another one. And it's just untouched by us. We never went near these as children. There's no damage done to them. There's no graffiti, no nothing. They're sacred sites. So we've always kept them that way. And then looking at the island itself, this is looking over to the east coast. This is our highest hill. Sorry, guys, it's only 1,000 feet. I'm sure many of you got 10,000 feet mountains or more. This is my highest one. It takes me 45 minutes to get up. But this is a type of moorland we have. We have no trees. We don't have an environment for trees. They grow for about 2 years. They think, well, I'm not going that way, so I go the other way. They go the broad way. But this is looking out onto the east coast. And then this is looking out towards an island. This is 41 miles away. This shot was taken with the camera. And this is the island of St Kilda and Hurta. It's the only dual World Heritage site anywhere in Britain because of its vernacular heritage and its marine heritage. And if we go on to, and when you get there, you come across this little village that was left in the 29th of August, 1930. There was 26 people left and they finally give up the ghost of living there. They couldn't live there anymore. And you go to this place and it's almost like it's haunted. But we also have over 1 million seabirds here. And Rick was talking about puffins. This is our puffin. And the puffin to us is a really important bird because it comes in May time, stays to August time. It's known as a painted clown. This beautiful face, but you can see the face of a clown. Very sad eye as well, and they got this incredible thing, incredible characters. But of course, we have lots of other wildlife as well, and we've got, this is the sea eagles, and we start to have them all around the islands, and then they're over the coastlines, and we have these incredible beaches that go on for miles. And just on my island alone, we've got 35 beaches. The longest one's over 12 miles long, all created from shells. So it's known as shell sands blown into the beaches, and they're just incredible, unpolluted gems. But then this is the other gem. We have this habitat called Machar, and in the summertime, there's just so many flowers. I remember running as a child through these fields, and the buttercups would be sticking to my heels as I'd run through there. It was just a beautiful, and the fragrance as you walk through that, it just fills the air of that beautiful perfume that you can never replicate. And this is how we harvest. So these are the coastlines. So we're harvesting right on the coast. This is getting the silage in for the winter time. This is an island just off where I live, 30 acres. And I was very kindly asked to go and drone for them how they did the harvesting. But look at that for a view. I mean, who wouldn't want to harvest there? And this is them again, just coming in with the reapers. And it's just a beautiful time of year. So this is normally done around about September time. Before the geese come in, and then it's backed into silage for the cattle in the winter time. The other part of our life here is fishing. I used to be a lobster fisherman, and we go out into the Atlantic in the springtime, fishing for lobster, brown crab, langoustine, swimming velvet crab, and using small boats of under 10 meters in length. And of course, back to the Highland cows, characters in themselves. There's just something beautiful about Highland cows. It's said to be in Scotland, the top 5 wildlife attractions is a Highland cow. Everybody wants to see one. And we have lots of them on here. And they've been very silly in there, as you can see. And of course, we have the sheep. We still have sheep. And we've had them all our lives. So we have them on the crofts. And this is them coming, charging towards me in the wintertime to get fed. And trust me, you don't want to be in the middle of that lot when they see you. You could just see that comical expression of them as they're coming down. But they say that we've linked quite a lot of our islands now, especially where I am in the south, and they're known as islands that are created by God and linked by man. And you have all these beautiful causeways that run there. This was an island where Prince Charles used to come, the island of Berneray, and it was his favourite Scottish island. So he used to come there and stay on his holidays and plant potatoes and all of those things. King Charles today, not Prince Charles. And this is another island, Eriskay. Again, you'll see these small fringe communities. So where I live in the Hebrides, I live in the south of part of the Outer Hebrides. So this is dominantly Catholic. The north is dominantly Protestant. These beautiful, beautiful views right across to the South Islands. And of course, we still have thatched cottages and lots of rainbows. And this, if you come, you're talking about the shoulder periods. This time of year, this is what you start to see, double rainbows. You can see the double rainbows there. It's really interesting if you look at rainbows as well. The other one is always inverted. It's upside down. Always look for 2 rainbows. And this is it just coming out to a little thatched cottage. You can stay in that cottage for about £150 a week. And this, if you want to come fly fishing, this is the view for the fly fisher. We have these incredible tidal pools where you can fish for sea turtle and salmon. And only you are there, you and the seals and the otters, nothing else. And this is us. Our life is dictated to by the sea. We're surrounded by the sea, and that is our daily cycle.
Oh, James, I feel like I could just look at your photos and listen to you talk about them all day. I mean, you talked about the romantic poets coming out here, and I feel like you have poetry in the way that you talk about your homeland. I have a couple questions, but I want to go back to this slide while I ask them so people can continue to enjoy it. You had mentioned a little bit about, in talking about your village, the kinds of people and the cultural attitudes. And I'm wondering, obviously, this is a natural paradise, but what are some of the noteworthy cultural things that people might be interested in about the islands, or are there any interesting festivals that people should be aware of if they're coming to visit?
Yeah, during the summertime, we have quite a lot of events going on. We have we have the Highland Games. We'll have that in the summertime. I used to take part in tug of war and sports and racing against each village. We have what's known as the cattle shows as well. This is where they bring all the animals in from the crofts and people judge them. You get home baking, you get tossing the sheep over a bar, you get tea and coffees, and hunt a bottle of whiskey and all those things. There's also great festivals up in Isle of Lewis as well. There's what's known as the Heb Celt Festival. That's a 3-day music festival, which has about 18,000 people coming to it.
Oh,
It's
wow.
really incredible festival, world recognized artists coming to it. If you're into art, you can come around the islands, and there's lots of art galleries. You can go and visit where the artists are in their studios. So we've got the art trails. We've also got the food trails that you can take around here as well. You can go and sample our food. You can go and taste it in places. Lots of walks with the RSPB wildlife, lots of boat trips to do. And just lovely things like that to do on the islands. We get a lot of people coming back year after year just to go and taste the seafood. Our seafood is second to none, although another island will always tell you that theirs is better than ours. But it really is, there's lots of opportunity in the summer, and it becomes a real hive. The historical societies now have started what's known as virtual walks. So there's new walks that people can go on, apps to follow these walks and tell you the history of them into their moorings. So we're trying to encourage people to go out more and more and explore for themselves and just enjoy the place.
And I mean, as I look over this natural beauty, I don't want to put a damper on things, but one thing that we here at Rick Steves Europe like to talk about and bring attention to is the impact of climate change. It's something that we work a lot to try to mitigate with our climate smart commitment. And I'm wondering, having lived for many decades in a place defined by its natural beauty, have you seen any of the effects of this?
Yeah, indeed. It's wonderful working with someone like Rick, who's got such values on the environment. We've seen dramatic changes since I've grown up here. As I said before, we had 12 weeks of summer. But we're starting to get a lot more hurricanes now. So we had a few in 2005, we had hurricanes that reached 128 miles an hour that killed 5 people from the same 3 generations of one family. 2 years ago, we had a hurricane that was 148 miles an hour off the coast. We're losing a lot of our coastlines. We're losing a lot of our archaeology. The sea levels are rising. So this year we've got our normal tide range is up to about 5.1. This year it's up to 5.4. So in my lifetime, in my village alone, we've lost 70 meters of coastline. And I know I've lost that because in the middle of the beach, there's a man when I was younger who took some stones from an old house and dumped them on the shore. Today they're in the middle of the beach, and we're just losing this with these storms that are coming in there. Things are changing, the winds are changing, the weather's changing. It's a lot more unpredictable. So for us, our houses are very strong. We're used to it, but people have suddenly become afraid of the wind when it gets to that level. So we're very, very conscious of it. So we'll do anything to protect it. We do know that if the sea level rises 0.5 meter, we'll lose all of the west coast where I live. It'll be gone.
And is that something that people in the Scottish Islands are trying to be part of the solutions about? Obviously, so much of it is our collective human responsibility and not just the people in places like this that are affected. But is that something that is very much on people's minds? And are there a lot of, ecologically friendly initiatives?
Yeah, we're trying to look at, we're really struggling on the west coast because it's all sand. So we're looking at planting marram grass that holds the sand together. But the issue we have is we're not the cause of the problem. The problem is coming to us, and we don't have necessarily the resources. The tide will take back what it takes. There's no way we can stop the sea. What's really interesting is when you look at our planning applications now, they're not allowed to build in certain areas. They have to be so far back from the sea now. So it's a very, very different. But there's lots of initiatives that are trying to do, and hopefully, they'll be successful. But we've always had climate change to an extent. But the worry for us now is that we are getting more of these big storms and these hurricanes coming in.
All right. Well, I don't want to finish our visit to the Outer Hebrides tonight on a low note. So I'm hoping that you mentioned whiskey at one point. Can you?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good time to have a whiskey. This is a new whiskey that actually comes from the islands. It's called the Herach. So if you've all got a wee dram there, We'll say sláinte vor, which is cheers and good health, big health. So sláinte vor. Let's go to the Scottish Islands.
Mm. Mm. Cheers to a great visit to the Outer Hebrides. As I said, I was eager to learn tonight.
We might need to stay longer till I finish this.
Oh. All right, well, we have one more archipelago that we are going to tonight. It is the Orkney Islands, and let's get going there now.
The Orkney Islands, perched an hour's ferry ride north of the mainland, are remote, historic, and, for the right traveler, worth the effort. Orkney's dramatic cliffs and rock formations seem to herald a different world. The ferry lands in the tiny port of Stromness. Stony and humble, you immediately feel an island kind of charm. Orkney's landscape is mostly flat and bald, with few trees and lots of tidy farms. The blustery weather keeps the vegetation low and scrubby. Trees just can't grow in the Orkney winds. With its sparse population, the island has no traffic lights. Most roads are single lane, and driving here is a joy. Fine sandy beaches seem always empty, as if lying on them will give you hypothermia.
So, James, as I said with your beautiful content around the Outer Hebrides, of course, I know Rick also, when he's filming, tries to show these places at their best. You know, you try to find a clear day, but of course, as you said, that's not always the reality here. I know I did a show for Monday Night Travel last fall on the Faroe Islands, and I was pretty blunt that I thought it was an amazing place, but that I didn't recommend it for all travelers, you know, for travelers that can't handle 50 degrees and rain or who aren't as into nature. It might not be the ideal place. What would your advice be to travelers on kind of determining if the Scottish Islands are a destination that's right for them, or if maybe it's a destination that for them is best enjoyed virtually like this?
You've got to be of a certain type to come to an island, really, because the problem we have in these islands is in some islands, there's not a lot of public transport. Depending if you don't like walking, there's not a lot of other things. You can drive to places. You've got to be fairly active to get around a lot of these places. To get to some of the beaches, you've got to walk quite a distance. To get to some of the monuments, it's over undulating ground. It can be quite difficult. But if you're like most of the travelers we meet through Rick, they're all adventurous. They all want to go out there. It's really trying to find and go at your own pace. Don't try and do too much. Find things that you can are achievable, and you can work with local people to do that. And you can actually enjoy the islands. If you've got a car, for example, you're hiring it, it's a lot easier. But many people come to go walking and hiking. And you've got to be prepared for the weather. I mean, you hit it on the nail there. You know, the weather is not always beautiful. You can be out there in 50, 60 mile an hour winds. And for a lot of people, that's quite challenging, standing up in that and not used to that environment. But we've always said that, you know, the weather only affects you if you've got bad clothing. But there's always an old saying in the islands, one end of the day will be good. So you don't necessarily have to go out in the eye of the storm. It'll always calm down at one point and do that. So just be prepared for delays as well, sometimes in islands because of weather. You might not get there on time. The ferry may be delayed. It may be cancelled. So be understanding that this is just island life. You know, we have to put up with it as well as everybody else.
And I know you said before that there's kind of an island mentality that you kind of operates on a different pace.
Yeah, so our island mentality is we just take day as it comes. We don't really plan for tomorrow because tomorrow never comes until today is over. So we live for that very moment of this day. I wake up in the morning in the wintertime and I don't plan anything till I look out the window. And then I plan my day. And that's the way you can be if you've booked a holiday, you know, and if you're staying in a hotel or a B&B, you can plan your day around that weather.
Well, it's a beautiful way to live no matter where you are. So let's continue on with our tour of the Orkneys.
Orkney, an archipelago of 70 islands, has about 25,000 people. The main island is called, confusingly, mainland. The vast majority of Arcadians live in Kirkwall. Tidy and functional, this town's buildings are more practical than pretty. Its pedestrians-only main drag leads from the cathedral down to the harbor. It's a workaday strip, lined with simple shops and busy with locals who all seem to know each other. At the harbor, fishing boats bob and ferries fan out to nearby islands. Today's economy is based mostly on North Sea oil and fishing. The local pipe band brings a ruddy, distinctly Orcadian groove to the town center.
So looking here at this local scene, James, I'm curious, are the locals in the Scottish Islands fairly friendly? And for travelers, what's a good way to be able to have meaningful interactions with locals?
I'd like to think we're fairly friendly. We welcome everybody who comes to the islands because we know that it takes quite a lot of effort to get here. And we usually find that most visitors, 99% of visitors, are really excited to be here. Great ways to interact, and I've seen American travelers do it really well, is go to the local pubs, start chatting to people, go to the local cafes. You'll find local people in there. Join in things like this where you'll start to see the pipe band. Wander down the street, going down to the pier, talk to people, go into small gift shops, talk to people there. Even go, if you see people along the road, stop and talk to them. They have incredible stories. Go to some of the historical societies. Go to the art museums and the art galleries. Talk to the locals in there and ask them about what it's like to live on an island. And you'll never know what story you'll get. And also sometimes you find that people will invite you in for a cup of tea. That still is an island tradition that we see today. People are very, very kind. They're very generous to visitors who come here. And there's a great honesty in the islands as well. We know that in these islands here, people have lost wallets and things. They're given them back at the end of the day. It's usually handed in and they find them on the island because we know where everybody is. Come and enjoy us. We love having everybody on our islands.
And let's switch now from the modern Orcadians to some of the prehistoric residents of this island.
Orkney is small, and its countryside charms are just minutes away by car. To get the most out of our time here, we're joined by my friend and fellow tour guide, Kinley Francis.
Orkney has two big draws: World War sites and some of the best prehistoric sites in Northern Europe. Orkney at one stage was the center of civilization back in the Stone Age.
The island is dotted with monuments recalling the island's distant past. The stones of Stennis, part of a dozen stones that made a big circle, are a reminder that 5,000 years ago, Orkney had a busy civilization, with more people then than there are here today. At the far western shore, Skara Brae illustrates how some Neolithic people lived. They hunkered down in subterranean homes, connected by tunnels.
There's a big community, 150 people living here at one stage. A third of the village remains. 2/3 were taken away by the North Atlantic. People lived under the ground in stone-type igloo buildings with turf roofs. And they lived under the ground to keep the weather out, to keep them warm. They were powered by oil lamps with whale oil and whalebone basins, and a very nice-looking community.
And all of this was accomplished without the use of metal tools. This, after all, was the Stone Age, before people learned to make and use metals. A few miles away, sitting quietly in what seems like just another field, is a remarkable burial mound. Maeshowe is the finest chambered tomb north of the Alps. For 5,000 years, people have lowered their heads to enter this sacred place.
Wow, this is great. Tell me about this place.
This is a burial chamber. And to our right and our left and behind you are 3 tombs. On winter solstice at sunset, the sun streams through this position here and illuminates the back chamber. The stone is sandstone, and it's been hand carved and corbelled, vaulted into position to make this beautiful chamber. And how Neolithic man managed to build this structure, no one really knows.
James, it's incredible to me to think that if I was driving by, I would have just thought that was another hill. And, with having a good guide or a good guidebook, you're able to discover things like this. And I'm curious, is there still ongoing research about these prehistoric communities? Are they learning new things about them?
Yeah, Orkney is an amazing place for archaeology. It's got over 1,000 ancient sites on there, and there's been a lot of archaeological surveys been going on recently, just down from the Stones of Stennis. And one of the things that they've been finding, they found another tomb very similar to this, but it was actually half buried. And within that tomb, they found skeletons of people. And some of the people were positioned like they were hugging each other. They found whale bones. They found an incredible staircase that they reckon was one of the first and the oldest types of staircase. They've been doing DNA research on the people in there to see if they were related. And what's really interesting is when you look at Orkney, they had a lot of immigration in Orkney in the period, in this period of females who came in there. So they immigrated into this place. So it wasn't a male dominated population. So they reckon that people here managed to maintain the DNA much longer of these prehistoric people than they did in other areas. But the whole of Orkney, between the pottery they find and everything, is just continually developing, and they're up for awards this year for some of the archaeological research that's been done here. It's an incredible place. There's just so much. Everywhere you go on the islands, it's just teeming with it.
Well, I know that kind of site-wise, the 2 major things that the Orkney Islands are known for are these prehistoric sites, and then some more well-documented historical sites from the 20th century. So we are going to finish by visiting some of those.
Orkney's arc of scattered islands forms one of the world's largest natural harbors. It's called Scapa Flow. In the 10th century, Vikings sheltered their warships here, and 1,000 years later, in the 20th century, so did the British. Scapa Flow was a critical base for Britain's Royal Navy.
Back during World War I, to prevent German U-boats from sneaking between the little islands that define this harbor, dozens of old ships were intentionally sunk to block the gaps.
You can still see many of these block ships breaking the surface today. But they didn't really do the job, as Britain learned tragically at the start of World War II.
In 1939, a few weeks after the start of the Second World War, a German U-boat slipped through a position just like this into Scapa Flow and torpedoed a British battleship and anchor. Over 800 men were lost. As a result of this, the British sent tens of thousands of troops here to Orkney to fortify the island with gun batteries and ships and airfields, and it became known locally as Fortress Orkney.
James, I'm wondering, with so many people, with such a military presence here during the 20th century, were there a lot of those people that stayed in the Orkney Islands? Are a lot of the people in the Orkney Islands today's, do they have a lot of connections to those World War II and World War I chapters of the history?
Oh yeah, I mean, there were so many servicemen taken up to Orkney at that time. You had seaplanes here, you had biplanes there, you had different runways, you had battery positions out on the coastline. But what's really interesting about Orkney is many of the men themselves became part of the Navy. There was also a huge agricultural process going on there. They had to feed Britain as well. They had to feed the people up there. They set up what was known as the Home Guard as well in Orkney. So many of the local people themselves became involved in looking after that. And they were responsible for going out and exercises and various things. Agriculture was very important there. But when the war came to Orkney, they also suffered a lot with blackouts. They had to have identities to get on and off the island. They suffered a lot from the bombings, these sporadic bombings that the Germans did on there. But on the other side of that equation as well, they had the servicemen coming in, but they also had movies coming in. They had naffies, they had shops and other things. So it was a really kind of vibrant part of life as well there. But the connections to this is still here in Orkney. You've got the Churchill barriers, you've got the Italian chapel. There's a lot of war memorials as well that will tell you about the loss of the local people on the island. So there's still a huge connection to that and a massive research. And there's new books coming out now about the life of the people in Orkney and those people who served in the war.
Well, you mentioned the Churchill barriers and the Italian chapel, and those are going to be our last couple sites of this little tour before we get to our Q&A session. So let's take a look at those now.
Britain built barriers to make the harbor safe from more surprise attacks. Winston Churchill visited and decided to connect the islands by building causeways out of concrete blocks. Today, tourists drive along these Churchill barriers as they explore the island. Orkney's most charming wartime site is its Italian chapel. Italian prisoners of war helped to build the Churchill barriers. They were given these 2 prefab Quonset huts, and during their free time, they were allowed to scavenge whatever wartime scraps they could find to decorate them. They built a beautiful little Catholic chapel that reminded them of their homeland. Inside, you can see the creative work of those Italian prisoners. Light fixtures made from ration tins, candle holders fashioned from brass shell casings, and painted windows with the illusion of radiant stained glass. Above the altar, Mary holds the baby Jesus, who holds an olive branch, a kind of prayer for peace. The chapel was completed in 1944, just 2 months before the Italians who built it were free to go home.
I find this such a obviously difficult chapter of history, but yet a charming example of just kind of cross-cultural pollination. And I'm wondering, is this chapel, is it now just a site, or are there people that actually worship here?
It every first Sunday of every on the summer, the first Sunday of every month, there's a service held here. You can actually hold private weddings here as well. So it'll take about 50 people, so you can actually book the place and come. Obviously, over the years, it's become very popular with tourists. So now it's a place to visit. So there's set times that you go there. So if you want to go to visit this incredible place, you've got to make a booking. You've got to book to go there. It's stunning. And what it really stands for is, when you think about it, it's really hope for the future and reconciliation. When you think of the war and those prisoners of war actually working on it. And they were actually told a little lie. They refused to build the Churchill barriers at one time because they thought this was for the war, but no, they were told that it was just really to link the islands together. But when you see this built out of nissen huts, out of tin cans and everything, and then the beautiful structure, this could fit on any Italian hillside and still be representative of what it was for those people. And really to worship God in the time of war was quite an incredible thing to have.
Yeah, it's amazing, the resilience, and I just think of the effort that they must have had to put in after already a hard day's work, and putting in more work on another construction project, but one that reminded them of their home. James, this has been a fantastic tour of the islands. I feel ready to hop on a plane and a ferry and go now, even though I'm sure it's the middle of February and the weather would be terrible. But we are going to get to some questions. Ben has shared a lot of great ones that our viewers have for you this evening. Before we get to those, we have a quick word from our sponsor, and this is more of a kind of Rick Steves, the more you know. For many people, this time of year in the winter is peak planning time, and so I know a lot of people are getting their guidebooks and starting to mark them up. And I have a member of the Rick Steves Europe team who works on our website that wants to tell you about a cool corner of our website that is important to keep in mind when you are doing your research. So we're going to take a quick peek at this, and then we will get to your questions.
Hi, my name is Gretchen Strauch, and I am the editor of all the travel information that we have on the ricksteves.com website. One of the things we do on our website is provide updates to the guidebooks as soon as we have them. So I'm here on our homepage. Let's check it out. Okay, so let's say that I'm headed to Europe and I've got the most recent edition of the Rick Steves guidebook for my trip. Make sure you're always traveling with the most recent edition. And I'm going to go here to the bottom of the homepage, right under there, under Travel Help. I'm going to click on Guidebook Updates. That takes you to a list of countries for which we provide updates. Let's say I'm going to go to London. So I'll click on England. And to find out what's come in since my London guidebook was published, I click there on London and I see that the National Portrait Gallery is set to reopen in June. The Museum of London near the Barbican is closed. That's information that's quite helpful to know. So I'll maybe mark that up in my paper guidebook. And while on my trip, if I find out information that I want to share with others, I'll click here in the sidebar at the bottom. It says, let us know. That takes you to a form that you can just submit any information that you think we might not know about, that your fellow travelers would find useful on their trip, and they will tremendously appreciate it. We appreciate it here at Rick Steves, and I appreciate you joining me to check out the guidebook updates on ricksteves.com. Happy travels.
All right. Well, thank you to Gretchen for taking the time to share that with us. It is a hugely helpful and cool resource that our guidebook team does. I appreciate it whenever I go abroad. I always check if there's been any updates to the guidebook, because we keep our guidebooks as up to date as we can, but Europe has a knack for always changing, not staying the same, so unruly. All right. Well, James, we have many more questions than I will be able to get to tonight, but we're going to get through at least a few. And I want to start with some activities. So we had quite a few travelers that were writing in asking maybe for a little bit more information about where or when to do certain activities on the islands. Liz, for example, was wondering, are there many islands that have opportunities to rent bikes and go biking?
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been starting to look at is electric bikes. Many of the hotels are now beginning to look at bringing in electric bikes. We also have people who you can hire bikes from. We've also got fat bikes that you can go over the beaches on. We've also set up transport systems that will pick the bike up for you, deliver it to where you're coming into, and then pick it up on the other end. There's other ones that'll take your luggage through there so that you can go through the islands on that. So cycling holidays in Scottish Islands is an absolutely fabulous way to see these islands. We have more cyclists. I see them struggling in the summertime. The only thing I can say to you on cycling, if you're really keen on it, is plan your route properly, because you have to look at the prevailing wind. I see people going the wrong way and the wind is dominantly coming from the south and they're going straight into it. So look at that. That is really important to plan. It's not a thing you think about.
Tracy's wondering about whale watching. Is that something that is offered in the islands?
Yeah, whale watching is done. We've got what's known as the Hebridean Whale and Dolphin Trust. They do special trips where you can go out and actually volunteer with them and go and look for whales. But all around the Scottish Islands, usually from May onwards, you'll start to see the most common whale is minke. We have bottlenose dolphins, Riso dolphins. We have orcas coming around. And one of the most amazing creatures we have in the summertime is the basking shark. and you'll see them round about June, July along the cliff edges, these huge creatures, and their mouths open as they're just feeding on plankton. So you can get any boat trip, you're more likely to see whales and dolphins around those coastlines.
Martrice is wondering about scuba diving. Are there people that will go scuba-ing if for some godforsaken reason they want to see those sharks up more closely? Water animals are like my #1 fear, so I don't understand it, but
we've just been talking about one island in particular, Orkney. They've got incredible dives in Orkney down to wrecks for people to do. If you wanted to go diving to, for example, St Kilda, where I live, there are boats that will take you out there. You can go down and dive in this incredible sunken volcano off the coastline. There's quite a lot of diving to be done around all the islands, but Orkney has always been famous for its diving. It's fantastic guides out there. You can also go out as well with the local divers and go scallop diving. You start to collect your own seafood as well. So there's really fantastic things. You can collect seaweeds as well, like carragins and all of those things. So yeah, diving is fantastic, and also for coastal archaeology. You get to see some of the sunken sites that I talked about in Orkney that was through climate change and rising sea levels. Yeah, so there's plenty. Look up the main websites for the destinations and you'll find the activity providers on there.
Excellent. And lastly, Lori was wondering about, are there certain islands or times of year that are best for the wildflowers that you showed?
So the wildflowers start around about mid-May. Right through to the end of August time. So you've got this incredible colors. They start from yellows into the pinks, the blues, the whites. The machars really come into their own about late May, June, July. And there's different bees, lots of bees, butterflies. It's an amazing place to be.
Can you say the name of those flowers once more?
The machar. Machar, M-A-C-H-A-I-R. It's the only Gaelic word used to describe this habitat anywhere in Europe.
And I'm interested because I know you had told me previously that you speak Gaelic. Can you give us a little bit more insight into, are there a lot of people that speak Gaelic as their primary language throughout the day? And is that something that has always been the case? I know that certain parts of Europe, there's a resurgence of these languages that had been suppressed at some point, but what's kind of the state of Gaelic in the Scottish Islands today? It's
beginning to make a comeback, but where I live, there's 70% of our population still speak it. So we've got 26,000 people across 13 islands. 70% of us still speak the language. So it's our natural daily language. All the road signs are bilingual, so they're in Gaelic and in English. It's easier for me to speak in Gaelic than in English. So when I meet friends outside, I automatically go into my own language. It's an indigenous language that goes right the way back to the 4th century and came over from Ireland with the Scotai and mixed in with the kind of Norse dialects we have. But it's a beautiful, beautiful language. And I wouldn't have had the life on the island that I had if I hadn't learned the language at the age of 6.
And I know that we often encourage people, even if you're not going to pursue a language to full fluency, just learning a few words and phrases and pleasantries can be a great way to connect with people. So for those interested in picking up a little Gaelic before their next trip to this area, what would your recommendation be?
There's a website called Love Gaelic, which you can go and do very brief little courses there on speaking words like Fáilte, Cimarahau, Vilukama, Sláinteva. And it just teaches the basic dialect that we have, the ordering of a drink, the cheers, and all the happy things. And it's informal as well. And that's the great thing about language. And to us, anybody who makes an effort to speak the language, then you're more than worthy of a pint. Beer.
Speaking of pints and all the happy things, we had quite a few people asking about the local cuisine. Grant in particular was wondering, what are some of the culinary specialties that you should plan on enjoying when you visit the Scottish Islands?
Well, in our islands in particular, we have black pudding. which is like a blood sausage, which you'd call it there. We have haggis, but we tend to eat a lot of seafood, steaks, beef, but we have lobster, we have langoustine, we have flatfish as well. So we have skate, turbot, all of those fantastic fish, salmon, sea trout. We like lamb as well. We like quite a lot of lamb and mutton and those types of things. But the summertime, definitely seafood. But we also have delicacies as well of puddings. We have a pudding called carrageen, which is made out of seaweed, dried seaweed, and it's mixed in with milk, and it's not very tasty, but we use it. It's one of those complete foods. So there's incredible food, and now is a really good time to come here because we've got a lot of really good chefs here. The food has changed, and since lockdown, across the whole of the island, you're going to find a lot of little roadside cafes that give you local produce there and then. So it's just fresh from the sea or at that moment. And lots of cakes as well is one of the other things that we like to have here. Lots of sweet treats for everybody.
Well, I will say, I always found black pudding to be a little bit disappointing because I heard pudding and was expecting dessert, but I'm glad to know that there will be plenty of cakes for me to enjoy.
You put a scallop on top of the black pudding and a little bit of bacon, and that will be the cure.
Just a couple more questions. Katie wanted to know, could you say one more time the name of your home island?
Uist, U-I-S-T.
U-I-S-T.
North Uist. North Uist.
And Sheila was also wondering, you mentioned a Gaelic word that meant something like longing. What was that one?
So Cianalus. So Cian, C-I-A-N-L-E-U-S, Cianalus. It means a longing for home. It's a very melancholy word. It's got lots of different types of meaning. And the interesting thing about the Gaelic language is one word can have 10 different meanings.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your culture, your language, the beautiful places that you get to spend your days with us. My last question is, you said that you usually wait until the morning to look out the window and decide what you're going to do. Since you've stayed up late with us, I hope you sleep in a bit tomorrow. But if you look out the window and it's a clear day tomorrow, what are you going to do on Uist?
I've spent the last 3 days with sea eagles and golden eagles, and I found a place where they are and they come close to me, and you just go out and try and capture that one picture. I've had some amazing pictures. Now today I was sitting with otters, so that's what I'll go and do. I'll have a wee wander around, and if I spot something, I'll be down there. I sit on the beaches for hours just waiting for something, but that's a peaceful life.
I can't think of many people who I could ask that question to of what are you going to do tomorrow? And they would say, go hang out with some eagles and some otters. So I hope that you get some of those excellent photos. I know that you have a photo book upcoming. So we have information about that in the resource links for people that are interested, as well as a link to your photography website. Thank you so much for sharing both your beautiful photos and your knowledge of these areas with us tonight, James. And I'm sure the Scottish Islands have just worked their way up on a lot of people's lists of places they would like to travel someday. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And I hope that we see quite a lot of people on our islands. Come and say hello.
All right. Thank you, James, and thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. As a reminder, once more, this winter and spring, we are going to have some Monday night travel shows really focused on travel skills and getting you the skills that you need to put together a memorable and smooth trip. So next week, Ben is going to be joined by the hotel and hospitality reporter, Jennifer Flowers, to talk about how to find the best lodging options for your next trip. We hope to see you there. And until then, we wish you a wonderful week. Good night, James.
Good night.
Good night, Ben.
Good night, Gabe. Good night, James. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.